everyone. Welcome to Achieving Success with Olivia Atkin. I am your host, Olivia Atkin. Each week, we will discuss the roadmap of achieving your personal and professional success. We will give you real-life stories on growing personally and professionally to achieve your life and career goals with the help of some top-notch guests. Today, we are speaking with Ron Cappuccio. Ron is the founder and owner of Ronald J. Cappuccio, JD LLM. He is a tax and business attorney out of Cherry Hill, New Jersey, with 46 years of experience. He helps his clients with structuring, planning, and designing business entities to maximize their profit and minimize taxes. You can find Ron by going to his website at taxesq.com. Hello, Ron. It's fantastic having you on the show today.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
To start off the show, can you tell me what success means and looks like to Ron Cappuccio?
Well, I like the title of your podcast, Achieving Success, because it makes it sound like what it really is. Success is not a goal. Success is a process. And I know that you have sports players on it, and maybe for them it's, getting that touchdown or any of the other types of sports things. But for most people, most of the time, it's a long, continuing process, and it changes all the time. What success looked like for me when I first started practicing is different than what it looks like now. And so if anyone says, oh, I have achieved success, that's good, but they really haven't. They've just achieved it for that one moment, and it's an ongoing process. So I guess that's my response. Olivia, what is it like to you? Do you agree with the process thought, or do you think it should be a one individual goal?
Ron, that's a great question. And no one has flipped it on me yet. So to me, success is definitely a process. I think throughout your life, too, you can have what success looks like to you today isn't what it necessarily looks like 5 years from now. When I worked in professional sports, success was very different. Now it's a big component of my success is the work-life balance, making sure you can do it all, but you're enjoying the moment as well, and making sure you have time for everyone and really acclimating your time. So I agree with you a lot. It definitely can change, and it's not what it looks like today. Doesn't have to be the end all be all, and that's the only thing success is your entire life. And I think that was a really good question.
Thank you. And once again, I think you're confirming the concept that by achieving success, you're going through this lifelong process where you're changing. What's the definition of success is changing. And it's all part of you getting happiness and a fundamental sense of fulfillment. And I think that's what it is. So for some people, it may be money, and some people, it may be a touchdown. But for most people, most of the time, they ignore what really is successful. And instead, they look at some immediate thing like, oh, I need to make X dollars now. Oh, I need to buy this house. Oh, I need to get married, and I need to have my 2 children now. And those are specific little things. And if they focus on that too much, they're never going to have that lifelong sense of success. They're just going to be rushing from one area to the next. So I think that that's a major thing that I've observed. And I want to add one more thing, and then you can go. And that is, many people, particularly younger people, are so used to everything being instantaneous that a longer run view is not part of today's society. And I think that is one of the causes for unhappiness, even when people might otherwise have a lot of options available to them. They're just looking at this short run immediate response.
And I think that's a key point is you have to look at the long view, not the immediate response, because you can miss a lot of opportunities and things that can bring you success in your life and happiness in your life by just looking at the immediate or looking at what everyone else views as success and not what you view as success. So that being said, Ron, you had brought up that you started early in your career. So, Ron, what made you want to go into law and specifically business and tax law?
Well, for me, it was a sort of odd thing. Remember, uh, being somewhat older than you are, being your parents' age, I can tell you that when I was in school, typically dads would come in elementary school and they would talk about what their jobs were. And one of my friends, dad was a lawyer. I didn't even know. They lived two houses away and I didn't know. And he came in and talked about being a lawyer and that he got to research, read, and argue and pay for it. So he was researching things and writing about it, getting to read other things he wanted, and arguing. Well, I like doing all those things. So I went home to my parents when I was in sixth grade and I said, well, I'm going to be a lawyer. And they said, okay, because you want to change careers every month, I guess, at that age. And it just stuck with me because that's really what I want to do. And I like representing businesses and people and preventing the government from stealing their hard earned work. That's it. I really enjoy that. And I thought it was wrong when I was relatively young that the government could tax and control and run people's lives. I still think that way. So I'm one of those people that's very, very lucky because, and I call it, I'm blessed actually, because I am doing well economically while I'm doing good. I'm getting businesses and people to keep their own money. So that's what really made me want to be a lawyer. And it's just plain fun for me.
Yeah, my sister and brother-in-law are lawyers, and growing up, kind of that, like you said, the liking to argue, and hopefully she
Mhm.
doesn't get mad at me for saying this on air, but she always liked to argue too, and she was very good at it, and my parents would always joke, "You should become a lawyer, you're really good at this," and long and behold, years later, she did, but it she looks back now and says, "I do like advocating for people, and arguing the point." And so it's kind of the same thing you were saying as well, is when you find that passion, putting it into what you want to do. Um,
And yeah, absolutely, and that's good. And what you're saying about your sister, and I think that that's so true with most of us. If you find something that you enjoy doing, it's not really work. And I'm sure you've heard that over and over and over again, but it isn't. And I'm one of those people that no one told me it was wrong to negotiate. A lot of people in our society have, oh, well, there's the sticker and it says this price. So that's the price I'm going to accept. Well, no one explained to me that rule. And so, even as a relatively young kid, I would go to stores and I would negotiate all the time. And remember, there were more individual stores then than there are now. So, I was learning how to play the guitar, and I would go to a music store, and I saw a book that was $1.25, which was outrageous then, which I would love to pay just that now. Um, and I would try to negotiate the price with the person and discuss it, and that was just normal for me, and it's still normal. I do not think that just because someone says something, I necessarily have to go with that price or go with that position. So being a lawyer lets me implement that basic thought process.
and it's definitely worked for you.
Well, yeah, and it has. It has because I'm happy. I mean, yes, it's financially worked, but I'm not saying that it hasn't
Mhm.
financially worked for me because it has. But I'm also very happy with what I'm doing. I wasn't able to work the first 2 days this week because I had a small annoying medical test, and it kept me out of the office. And actually, I'm happier in the office being able to do the stuff that I like to do and not having things pile up. And so, I am lucky that way. I enjoy it. I also enjoy home and some of the things I do and some of the different hobbies and stuff, but I focus more on my practice, and then that makes everything else look good.
Ron, when you graduated law school, you were younger than most. How did you
Mhm.
navigate growing professionally with other people making the assumption that you were too young to have a seat at the table or really make that impact?
Um, I didn't even realize that was going to be a problem at first. First of all, I looked older than my age at the time. Second, so that wasn't asked a lot of times. But I will never forget, and I was a lawyer at age 22. I went from 11th grade right to my freshman year in college, and then I graduated from college. I was 20, and I was at 22. I became a lawyer and got my Juris Doctorate. But when I was working with a small firm, and one of the head lawyers and I had been working on this a car dealership purchase. My client had a car dealership, and they were purchasing another car dealership. And frankly, I had done almost all the work on it because a lot of it was tax questions, things that I knew the answers to. And I remember sitting in the car, and we were driving up towards Trenton at the time because the other dealership was in Mercer County. And the partner of the firm, who was a wonderful guy, um, he told our client that we're going to celebrate on the way home and stop at a restaurant that unfortunately just closed now, but became one of my favorites for many years. And he said, because it's Ron's birthday today. And so the client turned around and said, well, how old are you? I said, oh, 25. He said, oh, you're 25? I don't really want someone that young working on my case. Like that. I mean, very specifically, and I will never forget it. And it was shocking to me because I didn't think it mattered one bit because I had already had a few years of experience, a specialization degree in tax and business law. So it was surprising to me that that was an issue. And occasionally that would come up. And so I actually learned how to use that to play to my advantage, so that I was just young and inexperienced. And, things have changed. So I use different things for an advantage. When I deal with people from larger firms that think that they are really knowledgeable and experienced, it's great. I let them be knowledgeable and experienced, and I just be this dumb Southern New Jersey old guy. And it works, and I've learned to accept that. The people are going to judge you by how you look, by the type of firm you're with, et cetera. But they don't know what's inside me. And so I don't necessarily show it to them.
And I think that's
But
a key.
please don't tell anyone about that.
And I think that's a
Sorry.
key point is using, sometimes that leverage, what your value is, what
Mhm.
your knowledge base is and expertise to your personal advantage. There's the saying, you don't want to be the smartest person in the room. Sometimes I joke, you want to be one of the smartest people in the room, but everyone doesn't have to think you're the smartest person in the room because it gives you an opportunity to also hear everyone. Sometimes when people know your position or and tell me what you think on this, but when they know your position or they know, you know a lot more than them, sometimes that perspective they have on you and your knowledge base or just how you look affects how they might present the data, how they act. And so it gives you, when you use your strengths and you kind of let them speak for themselves, it gives you a unique perspective.
Well, that's true. But you said something before you started with that I really liked, and that's knowing what your worth is. One of the problems I find with many people starting out is that they really don't know what their worth is, or they do know what their worth is, but they're afraid to ask for it. And that's not just starting out. I can tell you that um, prior to this year, I had kept my hourly rate for 10 years, the same amount. And with inflation and everything going up, it was just not tenable. And I was really undervaluing myself. So starting January of this year, I raised my rates by actually 25%. I did not lose one client. No one's hung up the phone and said, I'm not paying that much because that is what I'm worth. And then inflation has been so much and cost so much that in the middle of this year, I had to go and raise it again another 10%. And I haven't lost anyone from it because that's what I'm worth, and that's what I believe I'm worth. And when I was getting money less than what I was worth, that made me feel negative and bad. But now that I'm getting the rate more of what I'm in my mind I'm worth, I am much happier, and it makes me, in a sense, more successful. And as I can achieve success easier because I'm slowly getting more money for the exact same work that I was doing because I'm getting what's worth. So, one of the things, failure to recognize your own self value is a huge issue. And it doesn't start just at age 20 something, and it doesn't end at just age 20 something. It keeps going on throughout your life. And so you have to keep questioning yourself. And I have no idea why 5 years ago I hadn't raised my rates. I guess it was just a fear or whatever, but I had no idea. And there was no reason in the world that I couldn't have raised my rates all that time. So that's just a perfect example. Know your own worth and be willing to express it. And that's it.
And I think that's an important point. Know your worth, but also just as importantly, know how to express it. Because you sometimes, not you specifically, but sometimes as an individual, you think you could be the greatest and best thing, and you can raise your charging or your fees by triple, and people are like, that's not market value. That's like, what are you providing that it's that much? So it's also knowing your worth, but also knowing kind of what people are expecting for that price so that you don't
And,
build other way.
well, and I think that's true in many respects. But, I have people who will respond saying, "Oh, that's a lot of money," and I say, "Yeah, maybe, but that's what I charge." And then they try to negotiate my rate lower, and I have no problem with them trying to negotiate it. I'm not going to lower it, and and I think that uh, people may overvalue themselves in their own mind, but then when it comes time to actually putting that offer out and saying this is what I'm going to charge, they don't do it. And I suggest, if you are worried about overvaluing self, well, try that amount that you think is the value and see if the market accepts it or not. And that's
And I
because a
think
lot
that's
of people. Yeah,
oh.
go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that's a key point. Try it out. What's the worst that could happen? Just try it.
Right? They say no. That's the worst that could happen. So, if I had raised my rates and suddenly all my clients left, well, then I knew that that would not work. But in fact, it hasn't at all lessened the number of clients I have or the amount of work that I have. And it once again, I feel happier with my life in general because now I feel that I'm being compensated more realistically. And so that's what it is. It's just like, what you're doing. Are you being compensated? How are you being compensated? Is your achieving success giving you the kind of success and the kind of return that you think you should have? And if it isn't, what are you going to do to change that?
And I think that's a key point too, is sometimes reflecting and saying it isn't what I'm expecting or what I would like to see. It's taking those steps to evaluate it, take a step back, evaluate the situation, and put a plan together to say, this is how I can change it, or let's try this out.
Absolutely. And I think what you just said is important. A plan. So many people are good at what they do, but they're not good at the business side of what they do. So you may be a really good auto mechanic, and you may have a bunch of people working with you, but you're not planning it, and you may not be making the money, and you may not be having the kind of internal success because you haven't planned, haven't thought about it. And so many times that is the main problem of not only every new business, but I think it's a problem of most businesses. People are so busy working at the business not busy working on the business. They're not learning what to do as far as running that business. And that's why they fail.
And that's an interesting point. And as soon as you started saying this, it came back to me. I remember watching a video that Cardi B posted, and she said, everyone should take a business class at some point. She goes, I'm very successful, but I don't have the tools, or she didn't have the tools to run and operate a business. So she said she was paying all these people in different positions so that because she couldn't understand what was going on. And if she had taken those classes or learned about it, she would have a better understanding. And that's what she was doing. She was learning and she was trying to tell people you could open your business, but you have to understand the planning, the other aspects. Because just by hiring individuals, how do you even know they're the ones that really know what they're doing? And it's your brand they're affecting. And I thought that was interesting insight because sometimes you're right. People open a business and they're too busy running it, or they didn't necessarily have all the training on the business end, but they're really good at what they're doing. So sometimes that business stuff gets more left on the back burner while they're doing the things they're good at.
Well, the one thing you said is they're busy running it. No, they're busy working it, not running the business. They're busy working it. They're busy making the burgers or making the donuts, as the commercials would say, rather than saying, "Hey, this is what business is, and this is what I need to do in order to make it successful." And I totally agree that having business course, having a fundamental accounting course, understanding business structure is extremely important. I encourage every client to do that. And a lot of people don't want to do that. They don't have the time to do it, et cetera. But everything is so inexpensive online, or tremendously inexpensive uh, online things. You can learn about fundamental bookkeeping. You can learn about fundamental legal and accounting issues. And that is very, very valuable. Now, the other problem is people who want to get a 1 minute answer. So they type in Google, they say, what is the best form for my business? And then suddenly they think they know everything. And in fact, many times they're misled because they're asking the wrong question. You have to know the right question to ask. So you mentioned that person hiring the controller and hiring the bookkeepers and all these people. That's wonderful, but they have to know the right questions to ask them in order to get the right results. And so that's an absolute key.
And I
I
think
agree
that
with you.
And I think that's key, knowing the right questions to ask. It's not just asking a question, it's knowing the right one to ask to get the answer you're looking for. Ron,
Yes.
you obviously own your own business, your own law firm. Owning your own company, how do you take the experience that you've personally had growing it, working and running it every day, and give that insight to your clients?
Well, it helps me in many ways. First of all, being my own business owner, and whether it's a professional practice or not, it's still a business. And that gives me an intuitive understanding of other businesses and what people are going to do because I've experienced so many of the things. Like, as I explained, the recent experience of underpricing myself, even at this age and level of experience. Uh, so when a person comes and I say, well, how are you going to develop your business? And they say, well, I'm going to be less expensive than, and immediately I say, why? Why are you going to be less expensive then? And then if you start out less expensive, are you always going to be the low cost uh, comparison? Is that going to be your advantage? Or are you going to be a quality advantage? Or what is the main thing in your business? And a lot of people really don't know it. They say, well, I just like doing this, so I'm going to do it. And that's good. And that's a good start. But then they need to say, what is the main component that makes your business different and successful? Like, for example, you have a podcast. There's a million podcasts. What makes your podcast successful and different, and why? And so if you were coming to me, that would be one of the questions I would ask. Why does someone want to look at this podcast? And then the next question would be, how are you going to market it? And so for me, I've learned, and lawyers are much more limited in marketing than many different fields because we have ethical restrictions preventing us from doing a lot of contacting of people that aren't clients, doing a lot of marketing outreach that other businesses can do. But marketing is very important, but that doesn't mean going out and necessarily paying for ads. There are a lot of different kinds of marketing. And some people are better with like a network marketing. Other people are better with, doing intellectual marketing, such as broadcasts, etc. So my suggestion is, one, my experience helps me understand the running of the business. Two, do not sell yourself short, which is the main thing. And then how are you going to promote your business?
And I think that's some key points. Those key questions of how are you going to promote it is important to understand before you walk in the door with a new idea or you try to launch something, because you want to have that idea and that plan in place so that you could hit the ground running and that you can build your client base or that service or business up so that, a lot of businesses, they say, for example, restaurants fail in the first year. And part of that is because you're so busy and you didn't set up that full plan before you started. So things get lost in the shuffle when you don't have that good plan in place.
Well, I agree with that. And it's even more. Businesses aren't set up right so many times. They say, oh, I'm going to just press a few buttons and set it up legally, not realizing that they've made so many wrong choices and it's going to take a lot more time and effort to correct the errors that were made in the first place. So the legal structure is wrong. And then their accounting and financial structure is wrong because their legal structure is wrong in every step of the way. And they may be exposed to more liability than is necessary. So many times I have people come in and they've had a business for a few years, and I'll see that there's a husband and wife that own the business, and the wife is they're running the business. And I say, well, why is your husband on the business? And they say, well, because he's my husband, and I don't want him to feel bad. I said, well, that doesn't make any sense at all. If he's not involved in your business, why expose him to unnecessary liability? The protection of the business you're getting rid of. And so let's discuss it. That's one of the things I've also learned. When people are setting up a business, their significant other should be sitting in the room and hearing what has to be said and what has to be done, because they're going to be sacrificing and they're going to be part of the business and they're going to live with the ups and downs. That's forgotten a lot.
And I think that's a key point. The people in your life, whether it's a significant other, you've kids, when you own a business, sometimes the people in your immediate friend group, right? Those core people to you also have to sacrifice. And especially when it's starting out, make everyone aware so that, for example, if you are really busy running the business, doing that every day, doing the tasks like flipping the burgers, and you can't go and do something else in your personal life that people have seen you do. It's creating that conversation and expectations so that everyone's aware.
I think you're totally right with that comment of extending the group, not just to the immediate family, but explaining what it is and what your goal is. Because remember, some of these friends and people can give you some very valid input. And they could say, well, you drop 50% of the burgers that you flip. Maybe you should have someone else do the flipping. Yeah. That kind of thing. And so you need, sometimes your friend group can become a support group that you don't even think about. And the other thing is, too, don't be afraid to talk to competitors, because a lot of people are more than happy to talk about business and talk about the problems they have and talk about some of the solutions they have. And if people are confident and successful in their business, they're going to be happy to talk about it with you because they know that you're not going to take their business by any means. You're just going to end up supporting it. So don't be afraid to ask those competitors or those other people that are in the same or very similar businesses.
And I think that's a key point. Don't be afraid to have the conversation with the competitors because they're not necessarily just your competitor. You guys can end up building a relationship and helping each of your businesses grow and be successful. And I think sometimes that does get lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, when I was first practicing, I spoke to other tax lawyers and business lawyers and asked them for their opinions and discussions. And I ended up getting many referrals from these other attorneys because there was something they couldn't do or they had a conflict or whatever. And I got it. So that was a very significant source of business for me. And the same thing can happen in many kinds of businesses where they can't handle something or they do something a little bit differently. And you could be top of mind because you've had a nice discussion with them.
And I think that's important. When you build your network, you become top of mind on other people's mindsets as well. So
Mhm.
when they need something or they can't do something for some reason, they think of you. And that's always good to have. So, Ron, you had mentioned earlier what you see a lot too, and you see people doing is right from the start, people set up their businesses incorrectly because they might not have the knowledge base or they don't ask those right questions, like you were saying earlier. What would you tell people trying to start a business of things when they're looking at the type of business to set up to keep in mind so they know what what kind of they should form?
Well, I'm a lawyer, so I sell legal services. But the reality of it is, if you do not have a good tax and business lawyer set up the business, you're missing all of the opportunities that are there for the various kinds of business structures for liability, tax, and other purposes. So if people say, well, I really don't have the money to set up the business right, then you don't have the money to run the business. Simple as that. You don't have enough capital. People need to be aware they need capital to run the business. That includes setting up the business. That includes setting up all of the different financial aspects of the business as well. How many, are you going to need employees or are you just running this business yourself? Why? All those things, setting up the business right the first time is important. And that requires a variety of professionals. And I mean, I feel that speaking to someone that's a tax and business attorney right from the beginning is important because we help set it up right. And then from there, it's easier to run than if you set it up wrong and then correcting it. That happens all the time. And people that, some people say, well, that's just the standard form or that's what they require. And I represent a number of franchisees every year. And that will come in and they'll say, well, that the franchisor requires all these things. The franchisor wants this or that. And I say, well, let's discuss it. And I don't care how big the franchisor is. They're they're going to have someone that's going to listen to what you have if you have a reasonable kind of discussion or argument. For example, one of my clients recently came to me and is setting up a convenience store that's a chain. And the franchisor said, you have to have a corporation. And I said, well, no, we don't want a corporation. We want a limited liability company. The client immediately said, well, no, they're insisting on a corporation. I said, no, I think they want a limited liability entity, even though it says corporation. And I think they'll be very happy if we say we're going to set up an LLC. So I simply contacted them. Absolutely no problems. I didn't even have to negotiate. All I had to say, we're setting up an LLC. And they say, oh, of course, that's no problem. If they had assumed that it needed to be a corporation, they suddenly would have a much more expense and much more tax issues unnecessarily. So that's an example. I don't know if we're getting off base there a little bit, but that was just one example that occurred.
No, and that's a very good point, and that leads to my next question. Besides just setting up a business, which is very key, and doing it right the first time can save you lots of money, probably quadruple what it would have cost you to do it the first time correctly. What is some advice you would give business owners or people who are trying to run their own business or start something to keep in mind?
Step back. Don't just operate the business, but step back and look and plan. View the various professionals that you have working with you, whether it's attorneys or accountants or others, as resources to help as your team. And even though they may not be a full-time person, they may be a person that you just see occasionally, see them, talk to them, whether it's in a video conversation like we're having now, or it's a personal conversation. Bring up your issues and concerns, and chances are they're going to have 10 more issues and concerns than what you have, and help lead you down the right path to expanding and growing the business. And the interesting thing is, I have a lot of business clients that are concerned about the recession that we're currently in. And from my view, it's currently a recession. And having taken economics, it would qualify as a recession, but some people don't want to use that word. They're saying, well, maybe I should cut back on my marketing. And I say, no, you should increase your marketing. This is the time to increase marketing to make sure you maintain and or build your market share and keep your business going. Now, a lot of people wouldn't be viewing it that way if they hadn't talked to me or someone like me. They would say, oh, yeah, well, we're going to just our gross is going to go down. So marketing is X percentage. So we're just going to reduce that. And instead, I say, let's increase the percentage of marketing. So that would be an example.
And that's a good point, something you brought up, the recession now, but also COVID in general is something that no one thought was happening, and what businesses looked like versus what they look like now, and how companies operate pre-COVID versus how companies are operating now, and the overall landscape of what companies are doing has shifted. If someone's looking to grow their business or start a business during this time as things have shifted, like you said, what would be things you tell them to look for or to make sure they pay extra attention to so that they can grow instead of, kind of flatlining or not really getting that momentum they want?
Well, one of the things is overhead. One of the things we really learned is that office space is too much and too large and not needed for many, many businesses. Many people like working remotely as much as possible, which means that your potential workforce and your customer base is not just around the corner anymore. It could be around the country or around the world, actually. Um, and a lot of people are recognizing it. Now, I have been fortunate in that I was an early adopter of Skype many, many years ago. And Skype was a program, for those who don't know, that you could do free international calls with, and they were video calls. And as long as you had high speed internet, and our internet has gotten really good now, but at first it wasn't that great for some video call someplace. But I have clients all over the world that I have never physically met. And when I realized that I could do that, that it greatly expanded my business. And a lot of times, if you're in a service business, why do you necessarily expect that that service is only going to be around the corner? If you're giving advice, for example, if you're giving a service, such as some of my physician clients, I have a number of psychiatrists, psychologists that are making more money since COVID than after, because they're doing most things by telemedicine. And the biggest problem that psychiatrists and psychologists have is their patients don't show up. So now they have a much higher rate of people showing up. Now, it's true that if someone's going to do surgery, you better be in person. but Most of the time we're really in a situation where it could be remote. And I have clients literally all over the country and all over the world that I have absolutely never met. And some of them are pretty big. I mean, amazingly enough, I can't tell you what they are, but I have a whole chain of newspapers in one state that I've never been to. And they have 30 something different small newspapers. And, I have a client that has a chain of coffee shops around the world out of Turkey. And they came to me for the US business, but it's turned out that I've been able to advise them on a lot of other things too because of the perspective that I have. So I didn't limit myself. I accidentally expanded it, and it turned out to be wise. And that's what COVID has allowed a lot of people to think about. Every morning I drive past, and I'm in an office complex with three pretty big buildings. And there's one whole building that is a law firm of 100 and something people. And since COVID, there's never more than 15 at the most, 20 cars out there. And the parking lot used to be filled every day of the week, but people are liking to work home. So they don't need that big overhead of that space. And so that's something to consider. My office is actually the smallest office I've ever had, because before I had a library as big as my entire office suite because I needed all those books. But starting the late 80s, things switched over to being first CD-ROMs. And for those of you that don't know, it was like these little shiny discs, and they contained information, not just music, to now everything being online. So I have every tool to compete with the largest firm, and I can, because I have all the research stuff and I don't need any space for it. So I'm allocating my resources a little bit differently.
And I think that's a key point is look at how you're allocating those resources and really evaluate if it's something you think you need or something you really do need and will help you succeed in that avenue. Ron, business taxes and filing them correctly is really important. And sometimes, as we talked about earlier, the day to day shuffle of running a company or doing roles within the company take over. How would you advise people of tools or little things they can do throughout the year to kind of keep that tax I- idea in their head so that it doesn't get to the end of the year and now you're panicking and you're trying to do everything else and making sure your taxes are filed correctly and that everything's taken care of?
First, if you're in business, you need to have a business tax preparer. Do not use TurboTax or any one of those other pieces of software. They're fine. They're good pieces of software if you're a W-2 employee and maybe own a house. But if you're in business and you're smart enough and capable enough to run a business and to do your own tax return, you're capable of having a program much better than TurboTax designed for business taxes. That's number one. And anyone that comes in and they've prepared their own business tax return, the chances of it being correct are very slim. And that's as complimentary as I can get to that. And now remember too, I'm seeing things at the audit stage with the IRS, with various state agencies, but they're almost always wrong. And these programs ask questions, and then you follow a decision tree. And if you answer the wrong question, you're going down the wrong tree. So the first thing is, don't worry about saving a little bit of money of hiring a professional. And I don't prepare tax returns at all. So it's not like but I'm just telling you, you have to hire a professional to do it. Secondly, have someone help set up your bookkeeping system and your QuickBooks right from the beginning. Don't make it a catch-up process. Do it right from the start so that if I want to, I can just switch on my computer. And as you know, I have two very large monitors. I can switch to the other monitor and I can tell you exactly the finances up to today in my practice for this year. And I suggest if you can't do that when you're in your business, and maybe the current day might not be good, but yesterday would be good. If you can't do that, then your business is set up wrong financially, because you need to be able to do it, and you need to do it. And you need to allocate a little bit of time every week to just sit down and print out, what is your profit and loss for the week? What are your billings? What are your receivables? What's successful and what's not being successful. And the other thing that people don't do is put aside money for various things. So, and I know you and I have talked about this in the past, but the idea of putting aside money for taxes, for example, in a separate tax account, so that they can pay estimated taxes, because when you're in your own business, you usually don't have money being withheld, is important. Putting aside some money for investment, and that's investment in machinery and equipment. And yes, it's true that some things might not give you a technical return on your money. So, for example, me having two 32-inch monitors here might not technically give me any dollars back, but it makes my life so much easier. I have these big giant screens. I can make the letters big. It's easy to read. So why not do that? And that wasn't actually my idea originally. I had an associate who worked for me a number of years ago when I had a 17-inch monitor, and that was fairly big, but I was having trouble reading it. And he said, well, why don't you just get a bigger monitor? And I was saying, well, that's expensive, but it's more expensive not to have the bigger monitor. And earlier this year, when I went from one 32-inch monitor to two, I had the IT guy who helps physically set the thing up for me. And I said, I want two 32-inch monitors. He said, oh, you don't need that. I said, yes, I do. I don't want smaller ones. I want bigger ones. And I joke with him now, the next ones are going to be 55-inch monitors. But, that tool helps me. And I can't put an exact number of how many dollars it helps me, but it helps make my life easier in doing it. So, some people say, well, I'll skimp on that, or I won't buy this piece of equipment. I won't buy the faster laptop. Get the better piece of equipment. Spend the money on it if it will help you. And it may not be a direct dollar impact, but it will eventually be a dollar impact. And it will be a happiness impact. And that's success. If you're happier, you'll be more successful. So you're a perfect example, Olivia. You're having professionals do this. You could easily do your own podcast. Okay. The tools are there, the equipment there is supply. But instead, you have a professional service assisting you with your podcast, because you could say, hey, I know the questions, so I ask, I know the people to talk to. But the technical side of putting this podcast together is maybe a weaker point. So you spend a little bit of money, but you have increased your success and your happiness level in your life. So that's a perfect example of what you've done.
And I think that's very true. I have a great team behind me, and it's knowing the people to have as well that is just important, and knowing when to rely on them. Me and my team have conversations regularly to evaluate how things are going, the benchmarks, the hey, if we want to do this, what's the best way to do it? So that we're really meeting those goals, and everyone's on the same page, and everyone's helping and having a voice at the table. And I think that's really important, is having that voice, and everyone should have a say. You never know what an idea someone has can really grow. And I think it's exactly like you said, having that team behind you that knows what they're doing is important.
Absolutely. And so this is going to make this web podcast much better as far as quality goes than you would do on your own. It makes it easier for you to do, and you can focus on what's important for you rather than pressing buttons to determine how, what the right, settings are. You could just spend the time on the questions. And it's the same thing in running any kind of business, is know what the core things you need to do. And those things that aren't, you need to be able to hire other people to do, or to outsource, as the popular term might be. But That's what you need to do. And you've done it. So that will make yours more successful. Just like this podcast, you're already on Spotify. You're already on some of the big things. And I'm sure you had people help you to get to that point. If other business people would recognize that they can get a little bit of assets allocated to that to get to where they need to be so they can focus on the core business.
And I think that's really important, and definitely conversations me and my team have had of, we're on Apple, we're on Spotify, we're on YouTube, and making sure that everything's allocated and maximized. We had a conversation when Jayla, who's here today, helping us, when Jayla and I were working on the website, we had a conversation and she was like, we should really bring it to the next level. There'll be better capabilities for you to interact with your clients if you pay this much more. Is that beneficial? And I'm like, let's do it right from the start. It's knowing where to allocate those funds sometimes and seeing that, yeah, it could be more upfront, but down the road, whether it's be doing your taxes or starting your business, the return on the investment right off the bat, yeah, it could seem a lot, but what you could get out of that versus if you had done it incorrectly or just not put in the time or money is vastly different in years to come. So that being said, what you had mentioned earlier, making sure you fill out that form correctly. If someone doesn't have, if they're just filling out it for themselves or a family member, what are key things to look for in that tax form?
Oh, well, very simple. The key thing is if you're filling it out yourself, you shouldn't be looking at it. You should have someone else do it. And then you're going to look at it and you're going to see if the information is correct. And the key is your gross income correct? So many times I will see we're involved in an audit and the gross income reported is obviously wrong. A mistake was made. And, so that's it. So it's not looking at the forms. You want to look at the metrics that make the form. You want to look at what your QuickBooks or other financial program says. What is the profit and loss for this week? What are the key expenses? What are the areas of expenditures? Is something way out of whack for some reason? That's what you need to look at. Don't look at the forms. Don't pay attention and worry about the forms until the forms have to be done. And then you have the professionals do it. You should be looking at the things making that. And if you're in a retail business, having a point of sale system will generate the reports you need and will prevent the biggest cause of loss in a business. Do you know what the biggest cause of loss in most retail businesses is?
What is it?
Employee theft. And so a point of sale system will prevent that. Now, when I was in law school, no one talked about employee theft. And even in a lot of accounting and business programs now, that's like almost ignored. Every single business that I have represented has been the subject of employee theft, whether it's small or large, and it has a huge impact. And so employee theft, and that's not just in a retail business alone. It could be in a service type business. You don't know how many times I've had clients. I remember one time I had a plumber client and he had a number of trucks on the road and he was spending a lot of money on replacement parts and equipment and he couldn't figure out what was going on. And then one day, for some reason, he happened to go to one of his employees' houses, and in the garage, it was filled with all kinds of equipment, whether it was toilets and all the other kind of plumbing supplies needed enough to do houses worth because the employee would keep taking a piece here and a piece there and filled it up. And so that's where the big problem is. So having a point of sale system helps in the retail end and paying attention to where your equipment's going and machinery is going. That's very important.
Ron, you've brought up a lot of great points today. Ron, how can people get in touch with you in order to connect and maybe get your services in the future?
Well, you mentioned I have a website, taxesq.com. That's taxesq.com. Actually, I've had that website since 1996 when I first did it myself. And, now I have it done professionally, but for 20 plus years, 25 years, I had it, just all until the past 2 years, I had it done all by myself. Now I have it professionally done. The other thing is they can just simply call me. My phone number is listed. It's not hidden, but I'll give it to you. It's 856-665-2121. And they can call the office. And if I'm not available, just leave a message. And I know that's anathema to many people to leave a message. But the fact is, if you leave a message, mine gets transcribed into a voicemail. So I have everything typed out for me automatically. And so that's what it is. So that's how they can contact.
Thank you, Ron, for all of your insight today. A few key takeaways from today's conversation include success is process. It's not a just a goal, and once you get there, you have your success. It's definitely a process. Recognize your value, understand that value and what you bring to the table. Know the right questions to ask. It's asking those questions that could lead to really insightful conversations and knowledge that you need to know. It's the difference of going down the wrong path and the wrong rabbit hole and the right path. And don't be scared to talk to competitors. Build that relationships. Relationships are really important. This was a great episode with our top-notch guest, Ron Cappuccio. Thank you for listening and have a successful day.